Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the training mat, her gray eyes steady as she watched the morning sun climb over Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. At 42 years old, she had spent 20 years in the Navy, the last 12 as a hand-to-hand combat instructor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was crisp despite the early hour. Today was different. Today, 301 Navy SEALs would be watching her final demonstration before her retirement ceremony next month. But Sarah didn't know that yet. Right now, she was focused on the two men walking toward her across the training facility. Petty Officer Jake Morrison and his buddy Chief Petty Officer Brad Stevens, both in their late 20s, both thinking they own the place. "Morning, ma'am," Jake said, his tone dripping with false respect. He was tall, muscular, with a smirk that never quite left his face. "We ready for this little demonstration?" Sarah nodded once. "The class starts at 0900. We'll run through the defensive techniques I've been teaching." Brad laughed, nudging Jake with his elbow. "Defensive techniques, that's cute." Sarah had heard it all before. 20 years in a male-dominated field meant growing thick skin. She ignored the comment and checked her watch. The demonstration was part of a new training program she'd developed, combining traditional combat techniques with psychological awareness. Several high-ranking officers would be in attendance, evaluating whether to implement her program across all SEAL teams. "You know," Jake said, stepping closer, "some of the guys have been talking. They're saying maybe it's time for some fresh blood in the instructor pool, someone who can really show us what combat looks like." "Is that right?" Sarah kept her voice level. "No offense, ma'am, but when's the last time you saw real action? Most of us just got back from deployment. We've been in actual firefights. We know what works and what doesn't." Brad crossed his arms. "What Jake's trying to say is, maybe today's demonstration isn't such a good idea. We wouldn't want you to get hurt in front of all those people." Sarah felt the familiar weight of being underestimated settle on her shoulders. It wasn't new. It was the same weight she'd carried through boot camp, through officer training, through every promotion she'd earned. The weight of having to prove herself again and again, while men with half her experience got the benefit of the doubt. "The demonstration will proceed as scheduled," she said firmly. "Look," Jake lowered his voice, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "We're trying to do you a favor here. Word is, there's going to be some budget cuts. Some people are saying the combat instructor program needs to be streamlined. If today doesn't go well, if you look weak in front of all those officers." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sarah understood what was happening. She'd seen it before. Jake and Brad were part of a younger generation of SEALs who believed only recent combat veterans should be teaching. They'd been pushing for her position, spreading rumors, politicking behind the scenes. Today's demonstration was supposed to be her triumph, but they were trying to turn it into her downfall. "Are you suggesting I cancel?" Sarah asked quietly. "We're suggesting you let one of us take the lead," Brad said. "You could assist, of course, be part of the team, but maybe let someone with more recent experience run the actual demonstration." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now, not with so much at stake. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cold and clear, "I will see you on the mat at 0900. Be ready." She turned and walked away, leaving them standing there. Behind her, she heard Jake's low chuckle. "This is going to be embarrassing," he said to Brad. What Jake didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had earned 2 bronze stars and a Purple Heart. She trained hundreds of SEALs, Rangers, and Marine Force recon operators. She'd survived combat situations that would have broken most people. And she was about to remind everyone exactly why she'd been the head combat instructor for the last 5 years. The training facility filled quickly. Sarah watched from the preparation room as SEALs filed into the tiered seating surrounding the main demonstration mat. She counted them out of habit. 301, just as the schedule had indicated. The entire West Coast SEAL community had turned out. Among them were Admiral Robert Chen, Commander Jessica Raines, and Captain Thomas Whitmore, the the 3 officers who would decide the fate of her training program. They sat in the front row, notepads ready, expressions neutral. Sarah's assistant instructor, Petty Officer Maria Santos, appeared at her elbow. Maria was 26, tough as nails, and one of the few female combat instructors in the Navy. "They're ready for you, ma'am," Maria said. Then quieter, "I heard what Morrison and Stevens said this morning. Word travels fast around here." "I'm sure it does." Sarah straightened her uniform. "Ma'am, if you want, I can have a word with them. What they're doing, trying to undermine you before the demonstration, it's not right." Sarah put a hand on Maria's shoulder. "I appreciate that, but this is something I need to handle myself." She walked out onto the mat. The murmur of conversation died down. 301 pairs of eyes watched her, some with respect, some with curiosity, some with doubt. Jake and Brad were already on the mat, stretching, making a show of their physical prowess. They'd removed their uniform tops, wearing only their Navy PT shirts, muscles on full display. Admiral Chen stood up. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, whenever you're ready." Sarah moved to the center of the mat. "Thank you, Admiral. Today's demonstration will cover advanced defensive techniques designed for situations where an operator is outnumbered or caught off guard. These techniques focus on using an opponent's strength and momentum against them." Jake raised his hand. "Ma'am, question." Sarah nodded. "These techniques, are they the same ones you used in combat?" It was a trap question. Everyone knew Sarah's combat experience was classified from her time with a joint task force in Afghanistan. She couldn't give details. "The techniques are based on real-world experience, yes." "But you can't tell us about that experience, can you?" Brad chimed in. "That's correct, it's classified." Jake spread his hands, playing to the crowd. "So we're just supposed to trust that these techniques work, even though you can't tell us where or how you use them." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the audience. Sarah remained calm. "You're supposed to watch the demonstration and evaluate the techniques based on what you see. That's why we're here." "Fair enough," Jake said, but his smirk suggested this was all going according to plan. "So how's this going to work? You demonstrate on us." "That's correct." Brad stepped forward. "Ma'am, again, no disrespect, but shouldn't we be demonstrating on each other? I mean, there's a pretty big size difference here." He was right. Brad was 6'3" and weighed about 220 pounds. Jake was slightly smaller but still had at least 70 pounds on Sarah. "The size difference is exactly the point," Sarah said. "In real combat, you don't get to choose your opponent's size." Admiral Chen leaned forward in his seat, interested now. "All right," Jake said, cracking his knuckles. "How do you want to do this?" Sarah turned to address the crowd. "I'm going to ask Petty Officer Morrison and Chief Petty Officer Stevens to attempt to restrain me using standard combat pins. I will demonstrate appropriate defensive responses." She turned back to the 2 men. "Come at me as you would in a real situation. Don't hold back." Jake and Brad exchanged glances. This was their moment. "You sure about this, ma'am?" Brad asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We wouldn't want to hurt you." "I'm sure," Sarah said quietly. "Whenever you're ready." What happened next took 3 seconds. Jake moved first, fast and confident, going for a standard takedown. He was quick, well-trained, aggressive. Brad came in from the side, planning to pin her arms. Sarah didn't retreat. She didn't tense up. She did exactly what 20 years of training and real combat had taught her to do. The crowd gasped as Sarah twisted inside Jake's reach, using his own momentum to send him stumbling past her. In the same fluid motion, she caught Brad's incoming arm, stepped into his space, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent his 220-pound frame crashing onto the mat. Brad hit hard, the air leaving his lungs with a whoosh. Jake recovered quickly, coming back with more aggression. He grabbed for her shoulders, trying to use his strength advantage. Sarah dropped her weight, broke his grip with a sharp upward strike, and swept his legs. He went down sideways, landing beside his partner. The entire exchange took less than 5 seconds. 301 Navy SEALs sat in stunned silence. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face red. That smirk was gone now, replaced by embarrassment and anger. "Lucky break," he muttered. "Again," Sarah said calmly. This time, both men came at once, coordinated, using actual combat tactics. They weren't playing anymore. They were trying to prove a point, to show that she'd just gotten lucky. Sarah met them head-on. She blocked Jake's punch, redirected his force downward, and used his own arm as a lever to flip him over her hip. Brad grabbed her from behind in a bear hug, lifting her off the ground. Instead of fighting the lift, Sarah used it, throwing her weight back into him, then hooking her leg behind his knee. They both went down, but Sarah controlled the fall, rolling away and springing to her feet while Brad was still trying to figure out what happened. The watching SEALs began to murmur. This wasn't what they'd expected. Admiral Chen was taking notes. Jake came at her again, abandoning technique for pure aggression. Sarah stayed calm, stayed centered. She'd faced Taliban fighters, insurgents who fought with desperate fury. Jake Morrison was angry and embarrassed, but he wasn't trying to kill her. This was easy by comparison. She deflected his wild swing, stepped inside his guard, and put him face down on the mat with a joint lock that made him tap out immediately. "Enough," Brad said, breathing hard, getting to his feet. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Sarah asked, not even winded. "Or is this exactly what a combat instructor should be able to do?" Jake stood up, his face dark with humiliation. Around them, the SEALs were no longer quiet. They were impressed, discussing what they'd just seen, analyzing her techniques. But Jake wasn't done. "You want to see ridiculous," he said, his voice low and mean. "Let's tell everyone the real story. Let's tell them why you're really retiring next month." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Come on, ma'am. You think we don't know? You think the rumors haven't been spreading?" Jake turned to address the crowd. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell isn't retiring because she wants to. She's being forced out. There's an investigation." The room went silent again, but this time it was different. This was the silence of scandal. Admiral Chen stood up. "Petty Officer Morrison, that's enough." But Jake was past caring about consequences. His ego had been bruised in front of everyone, and he wanted to hurt Sarah the way she'd hurt him. "They're saying she falsified training records," Jake continued. "That she passed students who shouldn't have passed. That she put untrained operators in danger just to make her numbers look good." "That's a lie," Maria said from the edge of the mat, but her voice was drowned out by the sudden explosion of whispers. Sarah felt the world tilt. This was what they'd been planning all along. The demonstration had been a setup, but not in the way she'd thought. Beating Jake and Brad wasn't supposed to save her reputation. It was supposed to make her look aggressive, unstable, dangerous. Now they were using this moment, with everyone watching, to destroy her. "The investigation started 2 weeks ago," Brad added, stepping beside Jake. "We weren't supposed to say anything, but since we're all here, since everyone's watching, people deserve to know the truth. Some of the SEALs she trained, they died overseas. Maybe if they'd been trained properly, they'd still be alive." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. The men Brad was talking about had been under her instruction. 3 young SEALs killed in an ambush in Syria. She'd mourned them, carried their memories, questioned every decision she'd made in their training. And now Jake and Brad were using their deaths as ammunition against her. "You have no right," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. "Those men." Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Everyone out, now, except Morrison, Stevens, and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell." The SEALs filed out reluctantly, whispering among themselves. Maria tried to stay, but Chen waved her away too. Within 2 minutes, only 5 people remained in the facility, the 3 officers, Sarah, Jake, and Brad. Commander Rains spoke first, her voice icy. "Would someone like to explain what just happened?" Jake started to speak, but Chen held up his hand. "Not you. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, is there an investigation?" Sarah's mind raced. She'd heard nothing about an investigation. If one existed, she should have been notified, should have been given a chance to respond to allegations. "No, sir," she said firmly. "Not that I'm aware of." "Then where did this accusation come from?" Captain Whitmore asked, looking at Jake and Brad. Brad's confidence wavered for the first time. We heard from reliable sources." "What sources?" Rains demanded. "Some of the instructors, they've been saying." "Names," Chen said flatly. Jake and Brad exchanged glances. They'd overplayed their hand, and they knew it. "We may have misunderstood," Jake said carefully. "But there have been questions about the training program, about whether it's rigorous enough, about whether a woman should be running it," Sarah finished quietly. The words hung in the air. Chen turned to Sarah. "Is that what this is about?" "Admiral, I want the truth, Commander. Has this been going on for a while?" Sarah took a breath. She could play it safe, make excuses, let it slide. That's what she'd done for 20 years. Smile, nod, work twice as hard as everyone else, prove yourself over and over. She was tired of proving herself. "Yes, sir," she said. "For the past 6 months, there's been a coordinated effort to discredit my training program and push me out. It started small. Equipment going missing before my classes. Training schedules getting changed without notice. Rumors about my effectiveness as an instructor." "Why didn't you report this?" Whitmore asked. "Because I didn't have proof, sir, and because," Sarah paused, "because I've been dealing with this kind of thing my entire career. You learn to pick your battles." Rain stood up, walked over to Jake and Brad. "Did you lie about the investigation?" "We didn't lie," Jake said defensively. "We heard." "Did you, or did you not fabricate allegations about falsified training records and dead seals to damage Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's reputation?" The silence was damning. "I could have you both brought up on charges," Rain said softly. "Insubordination, conduct unbecoming, making false official statements. You just tried to destroy a superior officer's career in front of 300 witnesses." Brad's face had gone pale. "Ma'am, You were just what? Trying to help?" Chen's voice was sharp. "By accusing her of getting men killed." Jake finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. "Admiral, we didn't mean." "Get out," Chen said. "Both of you, we'll deal with you later." They left quickly, their earlier bravado completely gone. Sarah stood at attention, waiting. The demonstration she'd planned, the culmination of months of work, had turned into a public spectacle. Even if she was cleared of the false accusations, the damage was done. Everyone would remember the allegations, not the truth. Admiral Chen sat down heavily. 20 years, he said, looking at Sarah's service record on his tablet. 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, deployed 4 times, trained over 800 special operators, not a single formal complaint until 6 months ago. "Yes, sir." "The men you trained who died in Syria," Rain said gently. "I reviewed that mission. They were ambushed by a force 3 times their size. There was nothing wrong with their training. They were outnumbered and outgunned. It happens." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I know, ma'am, but I still wonder if you could have done more," Whitmore finished. "We all do that when we lose people. It's what makes us human." Chen stood up, walked to the window overlooking the ocean. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to conduct a formal review of your training program. Not because of what those 2 idiots said, but because that was always the plan. We're going to interview every SEAL you've trained, review every record, look at every outcome." Sarah's heart sank. "And then," Chen continued, turning back to face her, "we're going to expand your program." "What we just saw," Rain said, a slight smile on her face, "was exactly what we needed to see. Not the false accusations, but your response to them. And more importantly, your demonstration of technique. You put down 2 aggressive, highly trained operators in seconds, using exactly the kind of skills we need to be teaching." "But the allegations were witnessed by 301 SEALs," Whitmore interrupted, "who also witnessed you handle yourself with dignity and professionalism while being attacked, who saw you perform under pressure. That matters more than you think." Chen sat on the edge of a table. Commander Mitchell, we didn't just bring you here to demonstrate techniques. We brought you here because we're creating a new training division. Advanced combat instruction focused on exactly the kind of asymmetric tactics you specialize in. We need someone to run it. Sarah struggled to process what she was hearing. But my retirement is voluntary, Chen said. If you still want to retire next month, that's your choice. But we're offering you another option. Promotion to full commander, 3-year assignment heading the new division, and the authority to select your own instructors. The weight Sarah had been carrying for 6 months suddenly lifted. What about Morrison and Stevens? She asked. Rain's expression hardened. They'll face disciplinary action, making false statements about an ongoing investigation, attempting to damage a superior officer's reputation, conduct unbecoming. At minimum, they'll lose rank, possibly face court-martial, depending on what the review board decides. But here's the thing, Chen said, leaning forward. The attitude they displayed, that's not isolated. They learned it somewhere. This culture of doubting female instructors, of questioning their experience, of spreading rumors, that's systemic, and it needs to change. Which is another reason we want you in this position, Whitmore added. Not just because you're qualified, though you clearly are, but because every time you train a SEAL, every time you promote a female instructor, every time you show these young operators that skill matters more than gender, you change the culture a little bit. Sarah thought about Maria, waiting outside, probably worried sick. She thought about the other female instructors, the ones struggling to prove themselves the way she had. She thought about 20 years of being underestimated. When do I start? She asked. Chen smiled. First, we finish the demonstration. Those 300 SEALs are waiting outside, and they deserve to see the complete training program. Not the drama, not the accusations, the actual instruction. And this time, Rain said, we'll make sure Morrison and Stevens aren't the demonstration partners. They walked back out onto the mat together. The SEALs filed back in, the noise level high with speculation and gossip. But when Admiral Chen raised his hand, silence fell immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, Chen announced, what you witnessed earlier was unfortunate. Petty Officer Morrison and Chief Petty Officer Stevens made serious allegations without evidence. They will face appropriate consequences, but more importantly, they interrupted an important demonstration. Commander Mitchell, please continue. Sarah stepped forward. I'll need 2 volunteers. 50 hands shot up. For the next hour, Sarah demonstrated techniques she'd refined over 2 decades. She showed them how to fight from disadvantage, how to use leverage against superior strength, how to stay calm under pressure. She worked with volunteers of all sizes, male and female, proving that the techniques worked regardless of physical attributes. And the SEALs watched, learned, and respected what they saw. After the demonstration, dozens of them lined up to thank her, to ask questions, to request assignment to her new training division. Among them was a young female petty officer who reminded Sarah of herself 20 years ago. Ma'am, the young woman said, I just want to say, what you did today mattered. Not just the fighting, the way you handled it. That mattered to a lot of us. Sarah smiled. What's your name? Petty Officer Rachel Chen, ma'am. The Admiral's daughter, actually. Well, Petty Officer Chen, how would you like to be an instructor? The young woman's eyes widened. Seriously. Seriously. Report to my office Monday morning. As the crowd dispersed, Maria approached with tears in her eyes. You're staying. I'm staying, Sarah confirmed. And you're my second in command. Maria hugged her, professionalism forgotten for a moment. That evening, Sarah stood on the beach near the base, watching the sun set over the Pacific. She thought about Jake and Brad, about their attempt to destroy her. In a way, she almost felt sorry for them. They'd been so focused on tearing her down that they'd forgotten the first rule of combat: know your enemy. They'd thought she was weak because she was a woman, because she was older, because she couldn't possibly be as tough as the young male SEALs coming back from deployment.